Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, when the Biden administration ordered the evacuation of families of U.S. diplomats from Ukraine last month due to the increased threats of Russian military action and crime, a Ukrainian official clapped back. Quite frankly, these Americans are safer in Kyiv than they are in Los Angeles or any other crime-ridden city in the U.S. Yes, that's what a Ukrainian official said. And the comment really struck a nerve because it may not be so far from the truth. In fact, an LA Police Department detective says the out-of-control crime in the city is, quote, so violent, we're telling people don't visit because we don't think we can keep you safe right now, end quote. The city was surrendered to criminals by the LA District Attorney on his first day on the job in 2020 when he banned bail and prohibited prosecuting even the most serious crimes like murder and rape to the fullest extent of the law. The consequences of giving get-out-of-jail-free cards to criminals shouldn't surprise anyone. Flash mobs of thieves breaking into local businesses are giving new meaning to doorbusters as they ransack city stores like bargain shoppers on Black Friday. Looters are robbing trains like it's the Wild West, making off with millions of dollars worth of merchandise, including pistols and shotguns. A Union Pacific Railroad official says even when apprehended, criminals boast that they will face no serious charges, and within hours, they are let back out on the streets. But most troubling, over the past 2 years, Los Angeles has experienced a shocking 94% increase in homicides. The LA sheriff says it's probably one of the biggest jumps ever. And he lays the blame on the woke policies of both the district attorney and the county board. These senseless acts of violence aren't confined to liberal Los Angeles, and neither is the revolving prison door approach that is allowing career criminals to roam our streets. The U.S. murder rate hit its highest point in a quarter of a century last year. More and more felons are being released across the country as a result of permissive policies being pushed by progressive politicians and lenient district attorneys who view punishment as the real crime. Democrats in New York, for example, recently pushed through a state law requiring the release of suspects arrested for stalking, arson, robbery, and other misdemeanors without bail. They require the release without bail. And despite the dramatic increases in crime in New York City, a Democrat district attorney released a list of crimes. I'm serious about this, folks. Released a list of crimes on his first day in office that would no longer be prosecuted, including resisting arrest. The DA claims longer sentences don't deter crime or result in greater community safety. But a former New York City police commissioner points out the obvious, that when you say you're not going to prosecute certain crimes, you're sending a strong message to criminals. And it's the wrong message to criminals. He notes, since the penalty was taken away, stealing a car has become a game. As a result, vehicle theft is driving up the city's crime rate, and the New York Post reported just last week that the Big Apple is becoming a live-action version of the game Grand Theft Auto. But the wave of crime that has been unleashed is far more deadly than just stolen property. New York City's murder rate spiked an astounding 47% last year, and the killing spree is continuing into 2022. The latest victims include a teenager who was working at Burger King and 2 young police officers. Refusing to keep dangerous repeat criminals with a history of violence behind bars allows anyone at any time to become the victim of an entirely preventable crime. For example, the low bail set by a Wisconsin district attorney's office last November resulted in the release of a violent criminal with a very long list of charges going back 15 years, including running over a woman with a Ford Escape. Within days of being released, he drove that same SUV into a crowded Christmas parade, injuring more than 60 people and killing 6, including a 5-year-old child and several members of the Dancing Grannies who were entertaining the crowds at that Christmas parade. In a split second, the joy of the season was turned into a gruesome crime scene because a violent, repeat offender was set free. The Democrat district attorney has since admitted the release was, quote, a mistake. Folks, we cannot afford any more of these mistakes by public officials who are putting their personal political agenda ahead of protecting our public. If letting criminals out of jail without bail isn't bad enough, progressive politicians are even, get this, providing perks for perpetrators. The Biden administration, for instance, is allowing illegal immigrants to use arrest warrants as alternate forms of ID at airports to clear security checkpoints and board airplanes. Arrest warrants. Seriously, folks. And some liberal cities like New York and San Francisco have cash for criminals, programs that actually pay prior offenders in the hopes that they won't shoot anyone. Great plan. That's right. The same gang calling to defund the police wants to fund felons. A California Cash for Criminals program may have allowed some individuals to get away with murder. As long as the participants pledge to improve, they are still paid. Even when caught with a gun, or worse, suspected of murder, they get paid. Folks, it's one thing to give first-time nonviolent offenders a second chance, but rewarding career criminals by letting them loose and paying them an allowance is itself criminal. Democrats' approach to criminal justice can be summed up as take no prisoners, literally. And instead of admitting their approach has backfired, liberals keep looking for excuses and they play the blame game. To address the rise in carjackings in Chicago, for example, progressive politicians proposed banning the video game Grand Theft Auto. Perhaps the real problem is making crime all fun and games with no real-world penalties and only rewards, just like the video game. A retired police officer who was carjacked in his own driveway south of the city says the carjackers know that even if they are caught, they are going to get right back out. That's because the area's state's attorney promised to reduce the prison population, and by golly, she is keeping that promise by dismissing tens of thousands of criminal cases. As a result, about 100 people charged with murder in Cook County have been let out on the city's streets. The Chicago police superintendent is even warning that the Cook County court is making us all less safe by releasing violent offenders. And the horrifying numbers speak for themselves. Chicago had more murders last year than any other city in the United States, with nearly 800 homicides. That is more people than the small community I grew up near. 800 homicides. And shootings in the city are up a shocking 63% since 2019. One of the fatal victims was a 7-year-old girl who was gunned down at a McDonald's by a gang member who was allowed out of prison despite being charged with other crimes. The suspects in another recent shootout, which left one dead and 2 others wounded, were released without charges. Public officials charged with enforcing the law who signal that it's okay to commit crime by reducing or eliminating penalties are engaging in criminal negligence. It's time to put an end to prosecutors being partners in crime. I took the first step towards making our streets safer by introducing legislation to increase the penalties for some violent offenders and child predators, including life imprisonment for repeat offenders. Folks, progressive prosecutors need to stop playing politics and start doing their job, which is enforcing the law. Criminal penalties are not just suggestions. They are put in place to protect the public. Parents shouldn't have to worry about the safety of their children, and no one should feel unsafe, especially in their own neighborhood. Let's get serious about crime so that the only people in America who are afraid to walk the streets are the criminals. Mr. President, I yield the floor.